we are mildly interesting guys, and we talk about some stuff. So welcome to the podcast, we call it Joel the Podcast. It's Alex and it's Alex, here for Joel the Podcast. Bzzz. Hello everybody, I'm Alex.
And I'm Alex.
And this is our podcast,
Joel.
Welcome to episode 87?
I think that's correct.
Of Joel the Podcast. That I definitely knew that. I was not unsure at all.
Yep. It was just a joke.
That was just... Why are you not cracking up?
What a good joke. Oh, that was so funny.
Thank you. So welcome to episode 87 of Joel the Podcast. I wanted to remind everyone that Nathan does not owe me $1.
And even though we've been able to resolve more bets, Alex does not owe me $1.
Yes.
This
but
is turning out to be a bit less interesting than we thought.
A quick update on that. We resolved one more bet, which was the most correct round of 32 games, which was another tie.
Out of a possible 16, we each got 4.
And we continued on with our bets, and Nathan is currently doing about twice as well as I am. So we'll see where the last 2 rounds lead us. I'll need some big wins in order to catch up.
Yeah, it's definitely possible for me to just choke at the end here because my algorithm does bet the entirety of my available money each round. So if I get it wrong in the championship, I'm just at 0.
Unless the line is less than 7, then you just won't
Unless
bet
the line
anything.
is less than 7, then I won't bet.
I suspect the Final Four will be like that. Like, maybe the Gonzaga game will be more than 7, but
yeah.
I
think it all depends on if we manage any upsets in the Elite Eight. If we get, 1-1-1-2 in the Final Four, you're probably right. I won't bet the rest of the way.
So, we'll see. If I have 2 bets riding on the games tomorrow, and if I lose both of them, I'll be out of money. So,
all right.
So hopefully things go well for me.
Yeah.
With that said, let's do our sports minute. Let me get out my timer.
This is going to be an interesting sports minute. Don't know how much sports there is to talk about, but here we go.
1 minute's worth, as always. Here we go. So, the NCAA tournament has continued. Obviously without Purdue, but we've seen a continuing number of upsets. Most notably, Oregon State won another game since we last talked.
Right.
I don't remember where the tournament was since we last talked, but Oral Roberts had won 2 games. I think that had probably happened by the last time we played.
I think we were like midway through the round of 32 last we talked.
Right. So UCLA made it to the Sweet 16 and the Elite 8.
And in fact, the Elite 8.
So that's exciting. Also, IU sucks and didn't make it into the tournament.
As always.
And
that's right.
The Sixers are still in first place in the East, and they've gone like 6-2 without their best player. So I know I don't usually talk about Philadelphia sports, but we're pretty much needed to fill some time here. All right. That is the end
Another
of the sports
successful
update.
Sports Minute, lasting exactly 1 minute as always.
Exactly 1 minute.
With just as much content that we all know and love.
As always, let us know your thoughts by emailing us. You can find our email at our website, alexandalex@joelthepodcast.github.io/alexandalex@joelthepodcast.website/index.html. All right, I believe we have some emails to go through.
In fact, we do. We have several. All of them coming to us this week from Cephalopod Master, who has been particularly particularly email happy, which of course we're very grateful for because it means we'll be able to take up quite a bit of time here without too much effort. So here we go. We're starting off with this first email, which comes to us with the subject line, "I am a dumbass." Cephalopod Master says, "Here is a clarification about the IU rule for the rating system." Do you remember the IU rule from the rating system?
Yeah, it was like if IU wins any game, we lose 1,000 points or something like that.
Right. It was a little bit. It was. We needed some clarification, so he's bringing it to us here. He says, "The point loss happens when I become aware of IU's victory. Because I don't actively look out for IU's sports performance, if I'm not aware of it, as far as I'm concerned, it didn't happen. So you just have to have the right balance between how likely is it that I would hear about a particular win in passing versus how much of a waste of time it would be for you to track down the outcome of obscure sports that IU is participating in." So I think this is a pretty good point, is that if we don't tell him about it, he's not likely to find out.
Except
However,
I believe in his original email he said, "You have to tell me about this because I don't watch sports."
I think, well, actually, we can go back and read exactly what he said. But my recollection was something along the lines of, if he finds out that we didn't tell him, we lose. Let's see. "Whenever IU wins some sports game, you both lose 1,000 points. You need to tell me when this happens because I don't watch sports." So I guess you're right. And then he follows that up with, "However, if you fail to inform me of your winning, you lose double the points." So, based on that initial reading, it does seem like we would be obligated. But based on this new email, I think he's introducing some strategy to us of keeping it a secret unless we think it's likely that he will have heard about it.
In my personal opinion, and maybe Cephalopod, you can email us with your response to this opinion, but this sounds like a rating system to rate me and Nathan on this podcast, which makes it not make much sense to me that we would just both lose points for any reason, much less something that we have absolutely no control over. So,
right.
In my opinion, this is just not a good criteria, even though I like the overall system. So, that would be my argument, and if you disagree, again, send us an email as to why.
Yeah, I personally, I think that's a fair assessment. I think I would agree with you there. It's definitely interesting and pretty on brand to have some nonsensical requirements in here somewhere. But probably, I don't know, more podcast themed stuff would be, I don't want to say more appropriate because it doesn't.
I'm all for having interesting
this,
and fun
right?
criteria, but I don't think IU winning sports games is interesting or fun.
Sure. Okay, well, there you go. That's our response to your response. There is a bit more to this email, so I'll continue here. "I understand your concern about losing points very rapidly, but the reason for this approach was that a school's winning streak in sports tends to be more or less fixed over some period of time, whereas the subscriber counts of your channel will probably grow exponentially beyond 1 million very rapidly." Definitely true. Compounding this rapid subscriber growth with the 10% boost from each bet, which I didn't realize that's how it worked. That's also very interesting. "I find the scores can inflate very rapidly, which is why I've implemented these point-reducing measures. So as long as you make bets frequently enough, you will likely never go below 0. So maybe this is just kind of an external factor to motivate us to make bets.
Okay, so if that's the case, then I bet we can think of a better way to deflate our points than this. So right now, let's brainstorm for a minute or two. What are some good, interesting things that we can lose points for that aren't, more interesting or more fun?
I don't know if this is interesting or fun, but it makes a lot of sense to me if he wants to deduct points based on any time we don't upload the podcast in a timely manner. And hopefully he will listen to, he'll wait to make the deduction until he clarifies from us why it was missing. So whether that was my fault for not editing and uploading, or your fault for not uploading your half of the audio, or so on. I understand that's kind of I feel like this is maybe a larger risk on my end. So
Well, the fact
maybe
that you're
that's not the
suggesting
best
it means
idea.
that I can just be like, sure, sounds good to me.
Yeah, you can go ahead and lose points frequently.
Sounds good to me, although there have been a number of times where I thought I uploaded my audio and just didn't, so
Right.
I'll have to be much more vigilant about that, but I actually do think that is a good point loss criteria.
Sure.
And I think there could be additional criteria, like if the length of our podcast ends up being an odd number of seconds or a number of seconds divisible by 7, that's a more interesting criteria to me. Even though it's kind of pretty much random, right? It's more interesting to
more
me
or less.
than IU we're winning in sports.
Sure. So I don't know about the length of the podcast, since that can be easily edited, but maybe like, I don't know, the timestamp of when we get into our main topic,
How long our intro is.
how long our introduction was. So that definitely seems like it would be a little bit more difficult to game, especially if you're talking about like ending on an even second versus an odd second, or divisible by, I think divisible by 6 or 7 or something like that is a more fair approach.
Right. Well, and honestly, this is a thing that can be tailored to how frequently you want us to lose points based on what your formula needs. So, like, if you need us to lose points more frequently, then you can just
Right.
make it divisible by a lesser number. So,
Right. And also, I think if that does require a fairly trivial amount of attention paid to the podcast. So if you're not
Right. All you gotta do
feeling
is
that
pause it
motivated,
while you're
that's-
listening, write down the time, and then keep
Yeah.
going.
Exactly. So I guess that if that strategy is adopted, that becomes on us then to make it clear that we've finished the introduction, which I feel like we do, more or less. But
Yes.
We'll have to
It's
remember.
usually pretty obvious.
Right.
So I think that's a reasonable thing. But yeah, I would say that's something we could do. All right. So go on with the email, or to the next email if that was the end.
I forget where I stopped reading. Oh, nope, that was the end of it. All right, let's move on to the next email. The next email comes to us, of course, from Cephalopodmaster.
Of course. Thank you,
The
Cephalopod.
subject
By the
line-
way, I don't think I said that yet.
Yeah, we appreciate having so many emails. The subject line of this email is "Vegetable is dumbass," which I feel like
Agree.
we both agree. He says, "Hi, Alex and Alex at Joel the Podcast," which is a great greeting. I feel like nobody greets us really. I have 3 things I would like to ask you to discuss on the podcast.
Excellent.
Let's take these in turn. Number 1, is tea a vegetable stock?
All right. Well, I'm not familiar enough with vegetable stocks to say for sure,
Uh-huh.
but I would say, okay, my initial reaction is no, right? And the reason is that I don't think the leaves of the plant count as a vegetable. Is spinach a vegetable?
Yes?
I would say no. Like, I agree that we would traditionally think of it in a vegetable sense, but I generally think a vegetable is like an actual, it's not the plant itself, it's some other part of the plant or something the plant produces. I don't know if that's really accurate or not, so I guess
think
this
that's
is
a bad
something-
example, because what other part of spinach do you eat? You just eat the leaves, right?
I don't think that's relevant. I mean, I would say spinach, the plant, doesn't produce any vegetables.
Oh, okay. So you're like, because spinach doesn't have like a thing that is a vegetable, it's not a
You know
vegetable.
what I'm saying, at least, even though you can't put it into words any better than I can.
I think I know what you're saying, but like, I feel like, carrots wouldn't really be a vegetable then, right? Because the carrot is just the root, and all plants have roots, don't they?
That's true, but a carrot is way different from normal roots, right? Like, it's not just like a normal root. It's clearly a different thing.
Imagine if you could just dig up any plant and it would just be carrots. Okay, so that's fair. What about
this is terrible criteria because it's clearly just whatever I think is a vegetable, but
I mean, that's no more or less legitimate than any other classification, right? We just made up vegetables anyway.
well, even though it's no more or less legitimate, it's certainly less meaningful than other actual classifications of vegetable.
It might be less useful, yeah, but you know, I am of the opinion that you know, whether something is a fruit or a vegetable or whatever doesn't matter all that much because it's made up.
So do you agree with my assertion that tea is not vegetable stock?
I do, but I think I agree for different reasons.
Okay,
So
what are the reasons?
I've looked up the difference between a stock and a broth, which I didn't really know a whole lot about, but it turns out that although the terms are frequently used interchangeably, stock is made from bones and broth is made from meat or vegetables. So I think tea is a vegetable broth.
Ah. See, I was specifically avoiding looking anything up to make it a much more interesting discussion because I feel like now we just know that it's clearly not. But
Well,
so yeah, there's the answer to your question. Let's go with the next one. What's the next question?
all right, fair enough. In 2011, U.S. Congress affirmed that pizza can be served as vegetables in school lunch.
Yes.
I don't know. Is that true?
Yeah, so basically what it's really saying is there's certain requirements for what has to be served in each lunch, and one thing that has to be served is a fruit or vegetable, I believe. And so they were saying because pizza has tomato sauce, it can fulfill the requirement of a fruit or vegetable. That's what I believe happened.
Interesting. All right, so the question is then, if we boiled pizza in water, is this pizza tea or vegetable stock? And I think for the purposes of our previous discussion, we should amend this to pizza tea or vegetable broth.
All right, well, for one thing, it's certainly not pizza tea, okay? Because tea...
You don't think it's pizza tea?
What?
You don't think
You can't
this is
just
pizza tea?
It's definitely not. You can't just boil a thing and say, now the water is that thing tea. Like, that's just not how it works. Tea is specific types of leaves being boiled, right? So I don't think that you can just boil pizza and say that's pizza tea, or boil literally anything and say that's anything tea. Now, as for whether it's...
How...
Go
what's...
on.
I guess, like, I think I agree with you, but I kind of want to understand why I agree with you, right? Because, like, clearly there's a line somewhere between boiling pizza and boiling tea leaves.
Yes.
Because one gives you tea and one doesn't give you tea. I suppose there's not really a continuum between tea leaves and pizza, so maybe that question isn't actually all that...
Yeah, it's not like a matter of degrees, it's just certain things give you tea when you boil them and other things don't. And most things don't. Only very specific things do give you tea when you boil them.
Such as the little pouches of tea leaves that are sold as tea. Also, I don't know a whole lot about tea, but my understanding is you would boil the water and then, like, put the tea bag into hot water.
That's correct.
You don't, like, make a kettle of tea by putting tea leaves in the water and then boiling it.
You're right, and that's how you normally do it. I don't know if it would... I think it would probably still work if you just boiled the water with the tea in it already, but I don't really know for sure.
Right. So, should we be considering the question, if you put a piece of pizza in hot water, is it pizza tea?
I mean, I still think it's definitely not, based on my same reasoning.
Right. Is it just water?
Well, it's not just water because it has pizza in it.
So if you were to come up with a word for that, would you potentially use the word tea?
I personally would not, but I guess you could if you wanted to. like it wouldn't. Using the word tea would not be the worst word to use, because
Sure.
it would maybe imply to someone that you're boiling something in water, but it would certainly not be the best thing to use, because no, I don't think anyone would take that concoction and say, this is tea. I don't think anyone would be like, if you said you were giving them a cup of tea and then you handed them that, they wouldn't be like, what the heck is this? This is not tea.
So maybe there's two different ways of thinking about this, I think. And I think we've been analyzing one way, which makes me definitely think that it's not tea. And that's basically what we described, which is that, like, you say, I have boiled water, I have put a piece of pizza in it.
Right.
Do I have pizza tea?
Right.
And I think we agree the answer is no. However,
yes.
If you ask someone to define pizza tea, do you think they would reasonably come up with the procedure that we just described? And if so, why isn't that pizza tea? Because pizza tea is just a reasonable description for, like, if we can expect someone to understand what we mean when we say pizza tea, then maybe that thing is pizza tea.
Right. So I actually can't think of a good argument why to disagree with you here.
Yeah, it's really interesting now that I put it that way.
So I agree that if I said pizza tea, probably most people would understand what I was saying.
Yeah.
No, okay. Actually, I think a lot of people would be like, I have no idea what you're talking about when you say pizza tea. I think a lot. But if you asked people to if I said, make me some pizza tea, I do agree that probably most people would do what we described. And so there is a fine line there, a very minute difference, which is that just the word pizza tea or the term, people aren't gonna assume. I think most people wouldn't assume to know what you mean. They would just be like, what are you talking about?
That's a good point. You don't just, like, talk to people about pizza tea and they're like, oh yeah, pizza tea, we're cool with that. That exists. Right,
and furthermore, even though that if you ask someone to make pizza tea and they did that, they would likely do that, most people wouldn't classify that mixture as tea, which I guess is kind of getting into what we discussed before. Like, if you asked someone for a cup of tea and they gave you that, you would not be like, thank you, you would be like, this is not tea. So
that's a good point. Yeah,
even though the term pizza tea is most closely described by this process, yes, I wouldn't necessarily say that makes it tea. It just makes it the closest thing to describe pizza tea.
So this is definitely the closest something can be to being pizza tea. However,
right, that the only thing I would say is I bet you could make pizza flavored tea in some, like, adding flavoring to regular tea that would still keep it being tea, and that could be called pizza tea. And it would actually be tea. And in fact, I'm wondering now if that's what people might think if you said pizza tea.
Yeah, I guess on average, I'm not sure whether it's more reasonable for someone to think that you're talking about something flavored in a way that it's not typically flavored, or whether it's a literal interpretation. Because honestly, there's, like, a lot of weird flavored stuff out there. So, like,
yeah, like if somebody told me they had pizza flavored tea, I wouldn't, like, be amazed. I would be like, that sounds kind of gross. I don't know why you would want that. But I wouldn't be, like, shocked.
Right. Yeah, so
I think our overall, 90% of the answer is no, that's not pizza tea. And, like, 10% is, it's kind of pizza tea. But mostly no. Okay, so the second part was, is it now vegetable stew or something?
Vegetable stock.
Vegetable
/
broth,
vegetable
rather,
broth.
Right? And I would say the answer is probably still no.
Okay.
And the reason is because I don't think that in this act of Congress they were saying that pizza is a vegetable. They were saying that some component of pizza can fulfill the requirement of having a vegetable.
That's a reasonable
So-
analysis.
Like, if you put just tomato sauce in a pot and boiled it, then you may get. I mean, that probably sounds like it would just make tomato soup, honestly.
Right.
And you could argue that was also a broth. I don't know, but I would say that a pizza itself, just boiled, would not be vegetable broth.
Maybe the closest description of this, kind of by definition, would be pizza broth. I think we would agree with that, right?
I think pizza broth is a good description of putting a pizza in water and boiling it. Or pizza soup might actually be better because it said that broth is primarily made from meat and from meat and vegetables.
Right.
And pizza is not meat, and even though it has vegetables, it's not really a vegetable itself. So I would say probably most people would just call it pizza soup is probably the most accurate term to describe it.
Right. It does kind of seem more complex than your typical broth or stock.
Right.
Yeah. So okay, a lot of interesting discussion there. I think we reached a conclusion. For the grand finale of this email, David writes, I would like Nathan to boil pizza and maybe have Shelby taste it. Can you figure out a way to make Shelby drink the pizza boiled water without telling her what it is?
Honestly, that just sounds mean.
That's what
And
I
also,
thought.
I don't know how you would achieve that without her knowing.
Yeah, I don't usually just give her stuff to eat, and she unquestionably eats it. That's not typically how it goes down.
So first of all, we're talking about a drink here, right? Like,
Yeah,
you're gonna boil pizza and then take the pizza out and pour the drink in a cup and give it to her, right?
Right.
So,
and it'll
Does she-
probably be pretty much just hot water at that point, which, despite probably not being very pizza flavored, I still don't think that's nice to drink.
right. So, yeah, I guess our response to this is this doesn't sound that interesting, and also a little bit mean. Like, the more interesting it is, the meaner it is, and so it's just like,
Yeah.
know, it's gonna be bad no matter what. It's either gonna be boring or mean.
Yeah. However, I am interested by how pizza-y you can make your water by boiling a pizza in it. So
Right.
this
So, I
may
mean-
still be a worthwhile experiment.
It
Just-
depends. It depends on how much you're allowed to do. Like, probably the easiest way would be to blend up some pizza in a blender and then pour it in boiling water, and then like strain out whatever's left at the end.
Right. That's
Um,
doesn't
if you're
sound
not allowed
appetizing.
to use a Go ahead. What did you say?
That does not sound appetizing.
It does not. And probably the next best thing you can do if you can't use a blender is just to mash it up with your hands and like rip it into pieces and stuff.
Kind of like squeeze it over the water.
Well, I don't know if that's what I was really thinking. I think if you squeezed pizza over water, you would just get tomato sauce and grease into the water.
Right.
Since we're already putting the entire pizza into the water in this scenario, I don't think that would really be necessary. In my mind, you're just like taking pizza and like balling it or ripping it or crushing
Sure.
it with your hands and then putting it in. So
Trying to break it into smaller pieces so that it's more likely that the pizza essence will be absorbed into the water.
right.
You'll
So-
get a more flavorful broth.
But either way, I agree that would probably be pretty disgusting. So
Yeah. So, maybe someday when we can meet up again in person, we'll order some pizza and dig out the Joel the Podcast experimental archive and try this one out on.
don't hold your breath. But yeah, Is there anything else in this email?
That's the end of this one. However, there
All right.
is yet another.
Oh my goodness.
I haven't read this one yet.
So much content. Thank you, Cephalopod.
Yeah, this is great. We might not even have to do a regular episode based on how good this one is. Here we go. I am a last-minute dumbass. I should note that this email was sent at 7:01 p.m. tonight. That's Central Time, so a little over an hour ago at this point. He says, "Hi, Alex and Alex," and we say hi back. He says, "I expect you to be starting at the time that I think you guys are starting, which is not yet. So here's a last-minute email." So yeah, well done guessing about when we would be starting. He says, "Before you dig into the main topic for today, I would like you to give me quick advice, total discussion no longer than 7 minutes 33 seconds, on whether or not I should own a SodaStream trademark machine. This is not a paid/sponsored advertisement, and I am in no way affiliated with SodaStream trademark." Alright, we are setting a timer for 7 minutes 33 seconds.
Go.
I think that you should probably not own a SodaStream machine, and that's based on my personal opinion that carbonated drinks are best purchased from somewhere who, knows what they're doing. And also my separate opinion, which is slightly contradictory, which is that sparkling water is the worst thing ever invented.
Okay, first of all, that's not contradictory. But I was really expecting you to...
I'm saying, on one hand, you should buy your carbonated beverages for someone who knows what they're doing. On the other hand, I assume that the carbonated water people know what they're doing, but that stuff is straight garbage and no one should drink it.
Okay. I really thought you were going to say slightly contradictory opinion, but you should for sure buy it because the people who make it have no idea what they're doing. So I
really missed my opportunity.
So I generally know what a SodaStream is.
Right.
But I'm wondering if you know more details on it. Like what? So I assume it makes carbonated water and then you put, different syrups in or powders in to make it into different drinks. Is that what you do?
That's my basic understanding. So you buy the SodaStream machine, you buy, I assume, some SodaStream branded flavorings and such that you would then mix into your water and then stream it. So I suppose in that respect, it's just buying drinks from a company, but more complicated.
Right, so I'm guessing, again, this is mostly speculation on my part, I'm guessing that it's cheaper to have carbonated beverages this way than if you just bought, packaged, beverages of your choice. And so if that's the case and you are find yourself frequently drinking or wanting to drink carbonated beverages, then I would say definitely get it. I agree that sparkling water is trash, first of all. But for me personally, I would say that if I had one, I would only use it occasionally, and I would use it for I think sparkling lemonade every once in a while, or sparkling sweet iced tea can be pretty good. an interesting drink, but it's not something that I would want to have regularly. There's a reason these drinks aren't normally carbonated, which is that they're overall better not carbonated.
Right.
And as far as sodas, if you're trying to make actual pop for you Midwesterners, then I would say probably not worth the risk, I guess, because there's a decent chance that the sodas that you can make with this thing are just not as good as the, actual name brand sodas.
Right.
And so buying this would end up being a waste of money because you would just be constantly having to drink subpar sodas. So
yeah, now on the other hand though, I'm sure some people out there know what they're doing. And you could probably, I imagine someone's got a WikiHow article about how to make super good soda with your SodaStream or something like that. So maybe there's some secret untapped potential here that you and I are not that informed in the ways of SodaStream, but conceivably there's an entire community out there dedicated to improving the lives of everyone who owns a SodaStream because they collectively realized that they bought this useless appliance and now they need to make it worthwhile.
Right.
So
I guess
maybe they've managed to do that.
So without looking, how much do you think a SodaStream costs?
I think a SodaStream costs in the neighborhood of $150.
Okay. So I mean, I would guess more than that. Let's Google it and see how much. Oh wow, $90.
Oh, okay.
So I guess the bottom line of our I think I'm going to summarize what I think our advice is, and you can correct me if yours is different. But
Right.
It's you probably know if you want a SodaStream, and if you're not sure, you probably don't want it. Does that make sense? Like if you're not if you're like on the fence, it sounds like you don't want it enough for it to be worth it.
I don't know about that. There's definitely I've gotten the sense before where I've been like, I definitely want this thing, but I'm just not sure if like I want it because it's a smart thing to want, or I want it because their marketing is really effective or whatever. So my
Right.
strategy in those situations is usually just to wait for a while and determine whether I still want it.
Okay, so that's a good point. It kind of depends upon your situation. So what I meant when I said that was, if you want it and you're not sure if it's worth the price, get it. If you're not sure if you want it, then don't get it. That's kind of what I was saying.
Gotcha. So yeah, if you're on the fence, regardless of any external factor, you probably don't want it enough to spend money on it.
Right.
And if the sole concern is the money, you should probably get it, because I imagine these things pay for themselves over time. I think
Right.
you mentioned, probably making your own soda is cheaper than buying, cans of Coke or whatever.
Right. So, yeah. But I do agree that if you're like, is it really going to be worth it? A good strategy can be to wait like a week or two and see if you still want it. And if
Yeah.
you do, then it's probably worth it.
Right. I'm also curious if there's a way to use a SodaStream for interesting things besides creating beverages for yourself.
Mm.
Like, are there other uses you can think of for carbonated liquid?
No, I can't think of another use, actually.
Huh.
Can you?
No, not off the top of my head.
Okay.
I was kind of hopeful that there would be some creative idea. So David, if you do end up getting a SodaStream, I would appreciate it if you experimented with some other uses for your carbonated liquids.
Here's a use. Somebody asks for water, and then you give them sparkling water as a practical joke. That's the other use.
All right, that's our time. Hope you found that helpful. If not, let us
an
know
email.
via email and give us a new time allotment for that discussion.
All right, so
Here we are, roughly 38 minutes into the podcast.
Yep. I actually think it's a good thing because so for those of you who don't know, which is probably everyone since we haven't said anything yet, but you might know from the title, but we're doing a top 10 list today, and top 10 lists
Yep.
tend to be kind of light on the content side, honestly. So I think it's probably good that we had such a long intro today. So we can hit this top 10 list pretty quickly, and then we can be on our way. So today we'll be covering the top 10 podcasts, which is probably kind of a controversial topic since we are a podcast ourselves.
Right. I
but,
just want to get ahead of any speculation here and let everyone know that we did create this list 100% objectively.
Right.
These are, not our opinions. These are just the facts we carefully researched and curated over the course of quite a significant amount of time. I don't think we need to discuss exactly how much time, but
right. And as a result of all of that effort we put in and objective thought, this pretty much is the definitive list of top 10 podcasts. So if you're not on this list, you don't matter as a podcast.
Right. That's certainly true.
So I think without further ado, let's jump into it. Number 10 podcast is FM Radio. FM radio is kind of low quality in general, but it is quite I can't think of the right word, but there's a shit ton of it, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
So I think that overall the vast quantity of FM radio really makes up for the low quality of FM radio to give it a solid number 10 showing here.
Yeah, and I think one of the most underappreciated aspects of FM radio is that it's not AM radio, which is hot garbage.
AM radio.
I know, right? It's just whoever came up with the idea to have AM radio should probably be fired immediately.
All right, so bring us to number 9.
All right, number 9, we've got the 18 missing minutes of the Watergate tapes. Now, I know some of you may have some preconceived notions about the Watergate tapes, but let me just tell you, all of the actual release content is just useless and boring. It's really all in those 18 missing minutes, one of the greatest podcasts of all time, coming in at number 9 on this list. Talk us through the highlights. I mean, what can you expect?
Well, first of all, before I get to the actual highlights, I know some listeners out there may be thinking, wait a minute, they're called the missing minutes of the Watergate tapes because they're missing. How could you possibly know how good they are?
That's a good point.
I wanted to address that because we did mention in the beginning that we did a lot of research. So
yes,
that pretty much explains how we got the tapes.
Yep.
So with that being said, I would say the most interesting part to me was the rap in the middle, the freestyle
for sure.
rap. I thought it was maybe a little bit on the longer side, like 6 minutes is pretty long for a rap. But it was honestly very impressive. I don't think that they planned that beforehand. I guess it's possible, but I like to pretend, at least in my mind, that they didn't, which makes it more entertaining. What about you?
Absolutely, yeah. That's definitely a high quality moment. I think I've really got to say the rap is definitely up there for me. I was actually thinking of the other musical number when I was looking for highlights. I think these guys were really ahead of their time. It's just so impressive what they were able to manage in just 18 minutes.
Absolutely.
And of course, there's the reason they went missing, but
we obviously can't talk about that.
Right.
So that wraps it up for number 9, 18 missing minutes of the Watergate tapes. That brings us to number 8. Some of you may remember from our this actually came in our top 10 to sandwiches as well. Number 8 is The Entire Earth. As you probably know, every podcast ever recorded. I actually don't know that for sure. I don't know if the space station has ever recorded any podcasts, but the vast majority of all podcasts ever recorded have been recorded on Earth, as well as the vast majority of all audio content produced in general. And so this is another FM radio situation where most of it is total garbage. But the fact that there's so much of it, in fact, I would say more than any other podcast, would mean that it has to at least be on this list somewhere, and it beat out the previous 2. So coming in at number 8 is The Entire Earth.
Yeah, solid entry there for sure. All right, do we go to 7 or the honorable mentions first?
Honorable mention. Why don't you read your honorable mention here?
All right, so my honorable mention for top 10 podcast is you, the listener, your inner thoughts is a pretty good podcast. So I think that's pretty wholesome. You're out there making a great podcast every day. You didn't even know it, and you probably also didn't know that I can hear it, which is hopefully reassuring. I'm out there critiquing your podcast and occasionally giving you feedback on how to make it a better podcast. So there you go. That's my honorable mention. Obviously, you're not a professional podcaster or anything, so it doesn't really crack the top 10, but I had to give you the shout out.
Did you just get ice cream?
I did. It's pretty great.
I wish someone would just come give me ice cream.
Yeah, you should find a roommate.
I'm coming to live with you. All right.
Yeah.
So I would say that my thoughts on the listeners' inner thoughts are, the only reason it's not on the top 10 list is that only you, so the listeners may not know this, but only Nathan can hear your inner thoughts. I
Right.
can hear the things you say out loud. Nathan cannot hear those.
Correct.
So between the two of us, we know everything about you.
Which is
and
why
I
we
would
make
say
such a
that-
great podcasting team, of course.
Right, of course. And I would say that the stuff you say out loud isn't worth shit, so don't get your hopes up for my honorable mention, but I do have to defer to Nathan's judgment here and agree that your inner thoughts are probably a very good podcast to listen to.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that brings us to number 7, back to the list. Number 7 is Video Game Donkey's Mario Kart Wii video. I think it was made somewhat recently, or is that not right? I watched.
I feel like
Mario
it's happened
Kart
within the
Wii.
last 2 years.
I like in the last couple month or two, I
Yeah.
watched Summoning Salt's Mario Kart Wii video,
Ooh, yeah.
which is like the world record progression. So
Right.
I don't know if I'm just thinking of that because Video Game Donkey made his recently, or that was just unrelated. But I have watched Video Game Donkeys and it's quite good. Certainly better than the entire Earth. That was a pretty easy thing to say.
For sure.
So that's coming in at number 7. What are your thoughts?
Exciting news! It actually came out 6 years ago.
Okay,
so...
not even close. Not even close, baby.
But that just clearly shows you how timeless it is, how it's
Absolutely.
aged pristinely. If there's one thing I would say is that it's really just a shame that there weren't too many follow-up episodes. Obviously, Video Game Donkey has a very successful content creation career on his hands, and if he's listening to this, which odds are he will be sooner or later. I would just encourage him to get back to what works, which is the Mario Kart podcast, Mario Kart Wii podcast specifically.
Yes, with video, even though that's not part of the podcast.
Right. Every good podcast has a video component.
Right.
Sometimes it's an actual video of gameplay. Sometimes it's just a picture, which occasionally has some edits made to it.
In fact, I would argue that every single item on this list has a good video component to it.
Yeah, just a quick scan through. I think that's absolutely correct. So
Number 3 in particular. All right,
For
bring
sure.
us the next one.
All right, number 6, of course, we got to put on there. This is an excellent podcast. It's called "How Did This Get Made?" Do you want to give us a quick rundown of what this actually is here? Some of our listeners may not be as familiar.
Yeah, so How Did This Get Made is a podcast. The hosts are Paul Scheer, Jason Mantzoukas, and June Diane Raphael. And they watch terrible movies, and they talk about, the movies, and they don't really talk about how did this movie get made.
Right.
But they just kind of generally make fun of the movie, and they're very funny people, so it's a pretty funny podcast.
Right. And I think this podcast would really resonate with some of the limited members of our viewership because of the aforementioned bad movie component.
Right.
There's definitely some high quality episodes of low quality movies. Really, really worth the listen. And of course, I think the hosts have, I don't want to say perfect chemistry, but they're up there for sure. work well together. And
the hosts have Jason Mantzoukas, which means that it's already going to be like at minimum funny just by itself. So
yeah, for sure.
So yeah, absolutely deserved number 6 spot for How Did This Get Made. Number 5 coming in is any recording of Morgan Freeman. I don't think I've ever heard a single thing that Morgan Freeman said. I just hear his voice. So that's really why it kind of, is coming in at number 5 in this list. It's really just so pleasing to listen to him speak.
Yeah, for sure. He could be talking about literally anything, and it would sound incredible. In fact, I think if there was any improvement that could be made to any of the items on this list, it would just be if Morgan Freeman was the one doing that thing and speaking about it to me.
Yeah. I mean, Morgan Freeman, if you're listening to this, I mean, I feel bad saying this, but just replace us. Like, come on this podcast and you just take over if you want. Like,
yeah,
we would love to listen to you instead of us.
We'll send our podcast to him, and he can just voice over both of our parts, and then we'll upload that.
He can use his cool voice for me, and then he can use, like, a weird nasally voice for you.
Yeah, that feels about right.
Yes.
All right. Let's take a quick detour to number 4 real quick here. That is where we're at. Yep.
That's where we're at.
That's where we're at. Number 4 on the list, of course, you're probably at home thinking, how could anything get better than Morgan Freeman's voice? Well, let me tell you. Number 4, the Mario Kart Wii soundtrack. I mean, can you honestly tell me that is not better than Morgan Freeman speaking?
Absolutely not. I cannot tell you that.
So much orchestral. It's a masterpiece front to back. I think. Some of the highlights in here. I think we got Coconut Mall. We got Rainbow
Coconut
Road.
Mall. I cannot believe how good Coconut Mall is soundtrack wise.
It's just incredible. Like hit after hit. There's not a bad piece to it.
And how could we even move on without mentioning Koopa Cape?
Oh man, Koopa Cape! What a honestly, that's one of the best tracks in the game. That's definitely top 5 in the Mario Kart track top 10 list.
Honestly, a few of these tracks themselves could have just cracked the top 10 of this list, but we decided it would be unfair, so we just kind of conglomerated them all into number 4.
Right.
So I would say this is number 3. Number 3, 2, and 1 are better than this, but not by a lot. I would say. I mean, number 1 maybe, but
yeah. From here on out, it's for sure. It's really tight up top. I gotta say.
But let's take a brief moment for me to say my honorable mention. And I believe this episode would be incomplete without us mentioning Joel's Afro podcast as my honorable mention. I don't know if we've ever said this, but I've never watched or listened to Joel's Afro podcast. But it has the word Joel in the name, and although it's not as good as Joel the podcast, Joel's Afro podcast is a terrific podcast name. So. Right. Would be remiss if I did not mention it.
Absolutely, for sure. So keep it up out there, Joel's Afro podcasts. I think last we checked they were still making posts, chugging along at 7 subscribers. So, way to go, guys. Feel free to email us if you ever listen to this.
Yeah, and we'll give you some advice on how to be a successful Joel podcast, because we have more subscribers than you, and I hope this ages well.
we've mastered the art of Joel the podcasting. So, all right, that brings us back to the main list. We gotta check in here at number 3. Again, this may be familiar to you if you listen to our top 10 sandwiches episode, but number 3 on this list is, of course, a book. It could be any book, really. Any book is definitely the number 3 podcast out there.
No question.
There's there's so many benefits to a book. So, for example, you can read it out loud. You can read it in your head. It is, in fact, a sandwich. So, if you really feel like it, you could eat it. Although I think that's even in sandwich form.
We're not lawyers, and this is not legal advice, but you could eat it.
You could, in theory, eat it. And yeah, thank you for that disclaimer. You got any specific recommendations? Any noteworthy books recently?
Well, I believe I have mentioned on this podcast Brandon Sanderson's books.
For sure.
So, if you have not read any of his books, check out Warbreaker. You can find it for free on his website. And it's really, and hopefully you'll get hooked and get into that universe. But I would say, I mean, I really don't even know where to start when it comes to books, being a good podcast, because there's just so many different facets to this that it would be a whole podcast in and of itself for us to go into it. So yeah,
absolutely.
that's my. Do you have any book recommendations?
Yeah, let me just look back at my shelf here. Did you? This is going to be a tangent. Have we talked about the upcoming Dune movie? So first of all, this comes obviously because I'm recommending Dune the book as an excellent podcast. But apparently they're making a movie and it's releasing this year on October 1st. So
yeah, I did know that. I just had never heard of Dune. So when I saw that they were making that movie, I'm like, this doesn't mean anything to me.
Well, it's a pretty solid book. It's I'd say classic science fiction. It's pretty dense, so I feel like it's one of those that you'd probably need to read a couple of times to really get into. But don't let that scare you off. It's survived so long for a reason, so that'll be awesome. my noteworthy book.
All right. Coming in at number 2, I think everyone was expecting this. Joel the Podcast. You and I really come up with some of the best content in the world every single week.
Yep.
And I think this list would be obviously incomplete without Joel the Podcast. Now, there may be some listeners out there being like, number 2, Joel the Podcast. What's number 1 then? And
remember, this is an objective list. This is not our opinion.
We can't play favorites.
Right.
But what are your thoughts on Joel the Podcast at number 2?
Joel the Pod, man, it's been a journey. It's incredible to think back to the very first Joel the Podcast back then in the bowling alley. I know we had big dreams back then, and it's been really great to see all of those dreams come true. Over the past couple of years, we've literally every goal we've set, we've reached. We are incredibly successful, and you don't really need statistics to prove that. It's just the truth. So,
absolutely, and I would say that, again, aside from number 1, doing the research to come up with Joel the Podcast being number 2, that was very enjoyable. I loved listening to our podcast, and I know all the listeners do too, and we'll be happy that we came in at number 2.
Yeah, and looking at it, I think even we have to admit there's no way that there's number 1 is number 1 for a reason. Let's just put it that way.
It'll be self-evident when we get there, which I guess is now.
I guess is now. So number 1, here's the moment. Here's the big reveal. It's Joel the Podcast again.
Holy shit.
It's unbelievable. I can't. You had to have seen that coming. How could we not be number 1? Literally the best podcast on earth.
I really want air horn sound right now.
Joel the Podcast again, baby.
As you said, Joel the Podcast is obviously the best podcast on earth. So good that it had to be number 1 and number 2.
Yep.
I really want to encourage any listeners out there who, when they heard it was number 2, thought that something else would be number 1 to just turn off the podcast right now. You are a bad predictor, or you have bad tasted podcasts because this was the only thing that could be number one. The only thing. And I would never encourage anyone to stop listening to this podcast, but
yeah,
except
that's a very serious consequence. So shame on you. What more is there to say? I think
everything that needs to be said has been said. So there, again, as we said, this is a top 10 objective, definitive list of podcasts. If you disagree,
straight up facts.
If you disagree, you're wrong. But if you want to humor us, you can send us an email, and maybe we'll humor you. I guess would be how that would work.
Yeah.
And we'll tell you why you're wrong.
Yeah. Don't be upset when you get absolutely roasted for being incorrect if you don't agree with our extensive research and objective facts. Absolutely.
Okay, I guess that brings us to the end of the podcast. Did I have anything else we wanted to say?
No, I don't think so. Tune in again next week for more of the greatest and second greatest podcasts ever.
Yeah. All right. Thanks for listening, everybody. I'm Alex.
I'm Alex.
And this has been
Joel.